Welcome to the Ghost Story Grandma channel. Today, Grandma will bring you a mysterious and eerie tale. Get ready for it. Ghost Story, scary true night shift horror stories. Emma started her shift at 11 p.m. The hallways of Lakewood Hospital were silent, with only the faint hum of machines in the hidden corners. The night shift always felt different, unlike the daytime. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a pale glow, creating elongated shadows on the floor. A male patient was brought into the emergency room. He appeared to be in his 50s, his skin pale, his clothes filthy, as if he had been wandering the streets for a week. Emma and the doctor conducted an examination but found no signs of life. No heartbeat, dilated pupils. His medical records contained no information about next of kin. They left him there, waiting for the morgue staff to take him away. Emma stepped out of the emergency room and walked to the front desk to complete the paperwork. She glanced at the surveillance monitor, which displayed the long corridor leading to the morgue. A man in a hospital gown stood at the entrance. His image was blurry, but something about him felt familiar. She turned to look in that direction, but the hallway was empty. Only darkness remained. Another nurse approached the desk, placing a stack of files down. She asked Emma if she had seen anyone pass through the corridor, as she had just heard footsteps. Emma shook her head. The night shift was always quiet, but unexplainable noises occasionally echoed through the halls. At nearly 2 a.m., the morgue staff arrived to collect the body. When they pulled back the sheet, everyone froze. The hospital bed was empty. There was no one there. The emergency room door was still locked, showing no signs of being opened. A doctor hurriedly checked the records and called the security team to review the footage. Emma followed them to the surveillance room. The technician rewound the recording to the moment the patient was brought in. The screen showed the hospital bed, and then suddenly, static. When the image cleared, the bed was empty. No one had entered or left the emergency room during that time. A chill ran down Emma's spine. She said nothing and quietly returned to the front desk. Her eyes fell on the patient's file, still lying on the table. His name and details were clearly filled in. But what made her freeze was the recorded date of death, 1 year ago. Emma placed the patient file on the desk, a chilling sensation running down her spine. She looked at it again. His name, age, everything matched the man who had been brought into the emergency room just hours ago. But the date of death on the file was from a year ago. The nurse beside her saw it too. She remained silent for a few seconds before stepping back. Emma tried to steady herself, picked up the file, and walked out of the front desk. The hospital hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit. The air felt heavy. Night shifts always had a different atmosphere, but never had she felt as suffocated as she did now. She headed toward the surveillance room, where the doctor and technician were still reviewing the footage. They turned toward her as she entered. The screen continued playing back the emergency room footage. The patient lay still on the bed, then, suddenly, static. When the image cleared, the bed was empty. No one had entered or exited the room during that time. A doctor spoke up, his voice tense. He asked the technician if there was a system error, but the technician simply shook his head. The cameras were functioning normally, with no signs of tampering. Emma handed them the file. No one spoke for a few minutes. Another nurse accessed the hospital records and entered the patient's name. The information matched the file exactly. He had been admitted last year and had passed away after an accident. His file had been closed. The tension in the room grew heavier. One of the nurses left first, her face clearly uneasy. Emma remained still, staring at the surveillance monitor. She recalled the man she had seen earlier on the hallway camera. His figure was identical to the missing patient. Near 3 a.m., Emma returned to the front desk, trying to focus on her work. She opened the patient logbook and checked the list. A name caught her attention. The same patient's name was still listed for the night shift, with his room number and admission time clearly recorded. Emma immediately stood up and walked briskly toward the room. The door was slightly open, the lights inside dim. The hospital bed sat in the middle, its sheets wrinkled. No one was there. She stepped inside, checking the room carefully. A faint noise came from the corner, something dragging lightly. She turned, but there was nothing. Outside in the hallway, another nurse was approaching. Emma asked if anyone had cleaned out the room yet, but the nurse said no one had reported the patient being transferred. Emma glanced back at the empty bed, a growing sense of unease settling over her. The shift stretched toward dawn. At 4 a.m., the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Emma turned her head. A shadowy figure drifted past, walking slowly. It was him, the same man. She hurried out from the desk, following. The figure moved toward the main entrance. As he reached the door, he paused for a moment, then vanished. Emma froze, her eyes locked on the spot where he had disappeared. A cold chill ran down her back, but she didn't take another step forward. The hospital remained silent, undisturbed. She returned to the front desk and glanced at the clock. 2 more hours until her shift ended. What had just happened was impossible to explain. But come morning, the patient's file would still be sitting on the desk, with the date of death from 1 year ago. Emma kept her eyes fixed on the computer screen, where the patient's file remained clearly displayed. She tried searching for more information, but the system restricted access to old records. Only one detail remained: the confirmed date of death from a year ago. The door to the station creaked open. A colleague entered, placing a stack of files on the desk. They glanced at Emma briefly before leaving without a word. Emma picked up the files and flipped through them. Each page detailed the medical history of the same man. Strangely, the documents looked aged, as if they had been there for years. Yet the handwriting was fresh, as though it had just been written. She set the file down and leaned back in her chair. The overhead lights were still bright, but an unsettling feeling gnawed at her. Everything around her seemed normal. The hospital hallway was silent, except for the distant hum of machines. A passing nurse glanced into the room before continuing on her way. Emma checked the patient list again. The man's name had vanished from the system, as if he had never existed. She pulled up the admission records from the previous night. Nothing. But she remembered clearly. He had been brought into the emergency room. The doctors had tried to save him. She had checked his file with her own hands. She stood abruptly and walked quickly out of the station. The hospital corridor stretched ahead, neon lights reflecting off the polished floor. At the far end, a door trembled slightly, though there was no breeze. Emma stopped in front of it and peered through the small glass window. The room inside was empty, but on the hospital bed, the sheets were creased, as if someone had been lying there moments ago. The air felt colder. She stepped inside, reaching out to touch the bed. A chilling sensation spread through her fingertips. She took a step back, scanning the room. Nothing seemed out of place. But just as she turned to leave, a faint noise sounded from the corner, like the subtle shift of movement. Emma turned sharply, but the room remained empty. She hurried out, shutting the door behind her, but the weight of unease clung to her. Back at the station, another colleague was reviewing the system, her expression troubled. She turned to Emma, asking about the patient list. The man's records had completely vanished. There was no trace of him ever being admitted. But Emma knew what she had seen. She had held his file, watched the footage, witnessed his presence. None of this made sense. She sank into her chair, staring at the computer screen. Then, before her eyes, a line of text appeared in the system, typed by no one. A single message, like a whisper from the past. The patient's name, his date of death, and the confirmation that he had never left. Emma stared at the words that had just appeared on the screen. The patient's name and date of death remained, but no other data existed. She tried refreshing the system, but nothing changed. A growing unease settled over her, a feeling like she was being watched. The door to the station suddenly swung open. A nurse stepped in, her face pale with worry. She spoke about something strange that had just happened in the emergency ward. A patient who wasn't listed in the hospital records had somehow appeared on a hospital bed. But when the doctor returned to check, the bed was empty. There was no trace that anyone had ever been there. Emma stood up and hurried to the emergency ward. The room was dimly lit. The bed in question was tucked in the farthest corner. The sheets were neatly arranged, but as Emma approached, she noticed a faint indentation on the pillow. She reached out and touched it. An icy chill seeped into her fingertips, the same sensation she had felt before. She took a step back, scanning the room. A single sheet of paper suddenly fluttered to the floor, as if caught in an invisible breeze. Emma bent down to pick it up. The ink was smudged, the letters barely legible. She read it slowly, word by word, and realized it contained details about the deceased patient. But what made her blood run cold was the handwriting. It was identical to her own signature from his medical records. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Emma turned toward the door, but no one was there. The temperature in the room seemed to drop even further. A dark silhouette flickered past the glass window, too fast for her to make out any details. She rushed outside, her eyes darting down the long, empty corridor. Nothing. She returned to the station and reopened the system. The patient list remained unchanged, but this time, an old file unexpectedly appeared in the archive folder. Emma clicked on it. The image that loaded on the screen made her breath catch. It was a photograph of the emergency ward at night. On one of the beds lay a man, staring directly into the camera. His face was eerily still, his eyes hollow and black as voids. The timestamp showed it had been taken exactly 1 year ago, the night he had died. Emma sat frozen, her mind racing for a rational explanation. But before she could react, the image vanished from the screen, as if it had never existed. Emma turned off the screen, but the image of the man remained etched in her mind. She left the station, stepping into the empty hallway. The air felt colder than usual. Everything was so silent that she could hear the sound of her own footsteps. The hallway lights flickered once, then went out completely. A chilling breeze brushed against the back of her neck, making her shiver. She turned to look toward the emergency ward. The door was still open, the inside swallowed in darkness. A heavy weight pressed against her chest. Her pulse quickened as she walked faster, heading straight out of the area. That night, Emma made a decision. She would quit. She never returned to the hospital, but even in her sleep she could still hear it. The slow, dragging footsteps echoing somewhere in the distance, as if they had never left.